Have you ever waited until everyone left the room, just so you could finally let your guard down and cry? Not because you're weak, but because something inside you says it's safer that way. You smile, you function, you show up like everything's fine, but deep down, there are emotions you don't feel comfortable sharing with anyone. Why is it that some people only feel free to be honest when no one is watching? Crying in private is more common than people think, and it doesn't mean someone is emotionally weak, it often means the opposite. It's a quiet coping mechanism, a way of processing feelings without outside pressure, judgment, or misunderstanding. For many, being alone creates a sense of emotional safety that they don't feel in front of others. It allows them to be fully honest with themselves, without having to explain or defend what they feel. Instead of seeking attention, they choose solitude, not because they don't need support, but because they've learned that vulnerability isn't always met with care. For many people, the habit of crying in private doesn't just appear overnight, it's shaped by past experiences. Maybe there were moments when they tried to open up, only to be ignored, dismissed, or told they were too sensitive. Maybe they were judged for showing emotion, or made to feel like their feelings were a burden. Over time, those experiences leave a mark. They begin to associate vulnerability with rejection, and honesty with discomfort. So instead of reaching out, they slowly pull inward. What starts as a small act of self-protection turns into a pattern. Handle it yourself. Don't let anyone see. Even in environments that are safer later in life, that early conditioning can linger. The mind remembers what it felt like to not be heard, and the heart learns to stay quiet to avoid reliving that pain. On the outside, they often seem completely fine, sometimes even better than fine. They smile easily, keep conversations light, and show up for others when it matters. They're usually the ones people turn to for support, the good listeners who remember details and genuinely care. They know how to hold space for someone else's pain, even when they're quietly carrying their own. Because they've learned to manage their emotions privately, they've also learned how to present strength in public. But that's where the contrast lies. What others see is calm, steady, and composed, while beneath the surface, there's a depth of emotion that rarely gets seen. Beneath that composed exterior, there's often a very different internal world, one that's heavy, layered, and rarely shared. They tend to hold their emotions in, not because they don't need to express them, but because they've learned to deal with everything on their own. Over time, they may even start minimizing their own pain, telling themselves it's not that serious or that others have it worse. This quiet self-dismissal becomes a habit, making it harder to recognize when they actually need support. They feel deeply, sometimes more than people realize, but instead of speaking up, they process everything internally. It's a constant balancing act between staying strong on the outside and quietly struggling within, often without anyone truly noticing. People who cry in private also tend to have a very active inner world. They think deeply about things others might brush off, replaying conversations and wondering if they said something wrong or could have handled it better. A small comment can stay with them for hours, even days, not because they're fragile, but because they're emotionally aware and sensitive to nuance. They notice tone, body language, and subtle shifts in behavior. This level of awareness can be a strength, but it also makes it harder to let things go. Their mind doesn't easily switch off when something feels off, which is why so much of their emotional processing happens alone. So, why do they choose silence instead of opening up? A big part of it comes down to fear of being judged, misunderstood, or dismissed. They don't want to be seen as too emotional or feel like they're overreacting. At the same time, they genuinely don't want to burden others with their problems. They've often taken on the role of being the strong one, the listener, the one who holds everything together. Speaking up would mean stepping out of that role, and that can feel uncomfortable. So instead, they stay quiet not because they have nothing to say, but because silence feels safer than risking the wrong response. At the same time, this way of processing emotions often shapes them into incredibly kind and understanding people. Because they know what it feels like to struggle in silence, they become more attentive to others. They notice when someone's mood shifts, when a smile feels forced, or when something just seems off. Their empathy runs deep, not in a loud or obvious way, but in quiet, consistent care. They listen without judgment, offer support without making it about themselves, and show up in ways that feel genuine. It's a strength that comes from their own experiences, turning pain into compassion. When they finally do cry, it's rarely about just one moment, it's everything they've been holding in for so long. All the words they didn't say, all the feelings they pushed aside, all the times they chose to stay strong instead of being honest, it comes out at once. That's why the tears feel overwhelming, like a release that's been building quietly over time. But none of this makes them weak. In fact, it shows just how much they've been carrying on their own. If you see yourself in this, there's nothing wrong with you. You're human, and you feel deeply. And even if opening up feels difficult now, it doesn't have to stay that way forever. One day, the right person or moment can make you feel safe enough to share, and when that happens, you'll realize you were never meant to carry it all alone.